How do professionals prepare for their podcast interviews? Since being in the podcasting space since 2015, I've been both a guest and I've been both a host on different podcasts. As a guest, you can tell when the host is ready, they're prepared, they know what to do. Conversely, as a host, you know and you feel prepared because you feel comfortable doing your interview. And I want to walk you through how a professional gets up and gets ready to conduct their podcast interviews. And what I'm talking about in today's episode is I'm walking you through, if you're a podcast host, how do you prepare for your podcast guest that's going to be coming onto the show? The first thing that I do when I know I have a podcast guest coming onto the show is I want to make sure I know how to pronounce their first and last name. Because typically I'll introduce them quickly onto the show, and that's not something that I want to mess up. So what I will do is I'll go back through, I'll listen to how they're introduced on maybe 2 or 3 other podcasts. I'll hyphenate it, write it out how it should be pronounced if it's a name that's unique or not something I've said before, especially when it comes to last names, they can definitely be unique. And then when I have the guest on the interview, before we hop on, I ask them, hey, is this how you pronounce your name? I'll repeat it to them. I just wanted to make sure. Because the last thing you want to do as a podcast host is you conduct an interview with the guest, and then you're introducing them, and they say, oh, is this how you pronounce your last name? And it can be a little weird. It can be a little awkward. So you want to make sure you get that done before you have the interview. And then when it comes to the preparation process, you want to make sure you do your due diligence on the guest themselves. What's their background? What questions you want to ask them? Are there certain topics that you want to address? Now, I wouldn't say that you want to over-prepare. What I mean by that is I'm going to ask them these 10 questions in this specific order. You want to have that some sort of leeway where that individual coming onto your podcast, where it's not like a job interview per se. You want it to be conversational, but I want to make sure that I do my due diligence on the background of the guest. I'll check out other episodes that they've been on. I'll look more into their background. I'll check out their LinkedIn and see if there's anything new and unique that I could talk to them about. Let's just say they closed on a new apartment complex, or they put out a really cool LinkedIn post within the last week. I want to ask them about it and ask them to explain it a little further on the podcast interview. So I got to make sure that I do my due diligence and do my background check and do my background, just research. I wouldn't say background check per se. Do my background research when they're coming on to the show. And then when it's the day of the interview, I want to make sure all my equipment's ready. So I'm going to hop on about 5 to 10, honestly, probably about 10 minutes before the podcast guest comes onto the show. And within those 10 minutes, I'm going to make sure my lighting's good, make sure my camera's good, make sure my mic's good, make sure the sound quality is good, making sure that there's nothing out of the ordinary, where I'm not scrambling to get everything set up. I have my notes down next to me. I know how to pronounce their name. I know what I'm going to want to talk about. Obviously, the conversation could go anywhere that it goes within the podcast interview, but I have that confidence going into it. I know what I want to talk about. And that's really how the professionals prepare for their podcast interviews. They know how to pronounce the guest's name, I should say. And they know what they're going to talk about or have an idea of the topics that they're going to be discussing. And then they make sure all their equipment is ready to go. The last thing that you want to do is your guest is now waiting because you can't get your mic to work, or the lighting's not right, or whatever it may be, and they're just sitting there waiting, where if you had done it a few minutes prior, or 10, 15 minutes prior to hopping onto the interview, you wouldn't have that issue. I've had the issue where I'm conducting an interview over Zoom. I go to hop on Zoom. Zoom needs to update, needs to restart my entire computer. It takes like 5 minutes to go through the whole process. If I hop onto the interview 5 minutes before or 3 minutes before, now I'm late for the interview. I just don't like to be late for these type of things. And I know that it'll probably most likely annoy my guest as well. So really to prepare professionally for your interviews, make sure you know the guest's name. Make sure that you prep ahead of time. Know a general idea of what topic you're going to have. I've been on podcasts where the host's like, what do you want to talk about? Like, oh, I didn't even realize that's what you do. And it's like, you didn't really do any research. I mean, I'd rather you do a little bit of research. I mean, some hosts can definitely get away with that, but a lot of podcast hosts, they just need to do a little bit more research on the back end. And then the last piece is making sure that your equipment is set up and ready to go before you hop onto the interview. And that is exactly how the professionals prepare for their podcast interviews.